Sorry about the technical difficulties, people. I do not know what the problem is that my camera would turn on with the other program. So I'm figuring they're just not very good. Either that or my laptop is just not handling the new software very well. So there you go. Hopefully you guys will find me. I swear. Best laid plans. Doing everything I'm supposed to do, and I went to go live and nada. Nothing. Could not do anything. It was just so frustrating. And then my mouse decides to die on me, which is just par for the course. Oh, criminy. Trying to pull up my links again. I had to restart my computer so I could access my camera. That's how bad it was. So frustrating. Okay. Let's see. You found me. Yay! Hi, Mindy. Hi, Cupie. There was somebody else. I hope they find me. It's like, oh my goodness. Seriously. Couldn't even access my camera and say, oh, use this new stuff because we're going to be shifting over to it. I'm going, oh my God. I can't even get my computer to work with it. It's like, ooh, this isn't good. No. I'm trying to pull up my links again. It's like, goodness sakes. I've got some interesting stories to share with you today that I think you'll find compelling. It's going to be about imaginary friends, and I didn't have an imaginary friend per se. I used to I remember being 4 years old and talking to someone I figured was probably my higher self or something. I've always had someone I talk to. I talk to myself all the time. Look at me. I'm, essentially talking to myself right here. If you think about it. I hate using the pad on the laptop instead of my mouse. I don't know what's wrong with my mouse. It just says, I'm not going to work today. Let's see if I got that one up. That's enough. How's everybody today? It's been fun already. Yeah, our pets and our imaginary friends are probably our best friends, aren't they? Well, anyway. Yeah, we all can pray for Scott to get his hair back, Prayer works, right? How's everybody week been so far? Oh. Anyway, the reason I got interested in this is because I read this article. And then I was thinking about To Go Stories Online. Tony and his wife do that. And his wife had an imaginary friend as a young child. Greg, Greg fell asleep at his desk last night. I texted him and he's like, Nothing, nothing. I said, okay, well, good night. Oh, well, hi, Zach. Yeah, poor Greg fell asleep at his desk. Yeah, I had a feeling he did. Yeah, well, he had a power outage, and if you don't have a backup thing for your CPAP machine, it's awfully hard to sleep. I can't sleep without my machine, and I don't have a backup battery. So if the power goes out, I probably have to sit in a chair to sleep, which is not funny. No, he's real because Mindy knows him. He's real. He's one heck of an imagination if we're imagining him. I mean, we're having we're having a collective hallucination. Oh my goodness. Anyway, but she had an imaginary friend that she figured out later was a ghost, was a spirit of a girl. Yeah, Zach, I think he might be an AI bot. Yeah, he could be. I mean, nothing's, I mean, we live in a simulation. Anything's possible. Oh, Lord, you guys are funny. George Carlin, there's a quote from George Carlin, which is one of my favorite satirists. I mean, he was a comedian, but really was more a satirist than a comedian. He was basically telling us what stupid people we were. And he says, I was a loner as a child. I had an imaginary friend. I didn't bother with him. He was even antisocial with his imaginary friend. Well, when, I'm sure there are imaginary friends that aren't completely imaginary. I'm not saying this doesn't happen. And the scientists used to think that this had to do with early onset, early indicators of schizophrenia, which they have decided that's not what it is. And then they said, oh, it's a sign of creativity in a child. And I'm just like going, okay. So, I mean, scientists, you have to understand, psychology is not a hard science. It's like a lot of times they're flipping a coin saying, I wonder if this will help. I mean, a lot of times they're really good and they do help a lot of people. But you have to realize that when they say that something causes this and this that causes that, they're just going on data that or data, whatever way you all say it, that they've come across and their best guess, basically. Anyway, so I'm at Factinate. And they're talking about how many adults have had imaginary friends. And Reddit has a lot of things like that. And a lot of them, I would love to contact the person and say, can I use your story? But they're so old that really, it's really hard with this stupid. Oh, there we go. There's this one little girl. This one's called Nothing Like Self-Improvement, and she's saying there was another little girl. There was another me, she said. I went by Crystal instead of my real name. I started calling myself Crystal because I liked the other me more. And here's another one, number 40. My literally little friends. I had a series of small friends who were kids like me, but small enough to fit in my hand. I don't know why I ever imagined them regular humans, why I never imagined them regular human size. They just always seemed to be weird and stretched out when I did that. Sometimes my parents would give me old junk mail and I would use it to be a teacher to my small friends. Penna was my most well-known small friend. She was a very interesting character and I talked to her a lot. She was also mean and rude. Sometimes I wonder if these are like aspects of your personality. There's one that I don't think is appropriate for me to share, but maybe I should. I think maybe Scott might get a kick out of this. When I was little, maybe 4 or 5, I had an imaginary friend called Mary. She lived in the bathroom. The only time I ever talked to her was when I was pooping. My parents would hear me chatting away to Mary while on the toilet. Well, some of us read books, right? Not imaginary per se. This is a little kid, 5 or 6 year old kid, used to break into houses as a little kid. I hope they didn't keep doing that as they grew up. I lived in a really run-down part of town with a huge amount of foreclosed and empty houses. So they would pry off the window screens and crawl inside. Well, one abandoned house, there was this young Hispanic girl hanging out in the upstairs bathroom. I'd go up there and she would talk to me. We'd play tag and hide and go seek and truth or dare. I always invited her home for dinner, but she said she couldn't leave because she had to wait for her mom to come home. I guess it made sense to me at the time. But when I think back, there was nothing in that house, not even silverware in the kitchen drawers. Carpets were all mildewed and it was seriously empty. I don't think she could have really been there. Her name was Sarah. I don't think she ever told me her last name. She always wore these cut-off tank tops and pastel orange spandex shorts. Now that certainly gives you a feeling of the 80s there. And I think she finally figured out that this girl, she had bobbed cut hair where the hair was shorter in the back than the front, missing a couple of teeth, and she was a little chubby. I don't think that was imaginary, do you? I'm gonna look at your comments on my phone so I don't have to keep on changing. Yeah. If I can manage to do it. Beginning to wonder. There we go. 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 This keeps repeating itself. Anyway. So we have a pooping friend, yeah. Can you imagine? That? It's just like, whoa, I'm pushing my thing back a bit. Yeah, Greg's our imaginary friend. Yeah, he's the perfect man. We just imagined him that way. Anyway. Oh, damn mouse. Well, there was this, some of them I think are obviously imaginary, like Bojo. He lived in a crack in my stairs and ate mush from my sandbox. I mean, that's probably not a ghost. This one person, when I was little, I didn't have many friends. In fact, everyone hated me, made up a friend I called Angel, which is my middle name. We did everything together. But as time goes on, even losers make friends. Angel didn't like that. Sometimes he would take over, do things to ruin relationships, things I would have to make up stories in order to explain. I lost a lot of friends because of him. I have no idea how to get rid of him. Oh, my goodness. My daughter had an imaginary friend named Boy for years. I had to intervene in their arguments many times. She spoke for him in a deep, gravelly voice that scared the snot out of me. And she says, red rum. Yeah. When I was a kid, young, maybe between 5 and 8, I had an imaginary friend that was a skeleton dog. It would race everywhere and always be beside me. Always be beside me when I reached my destination. The animals in the woods behind me were afraid of it, of course. Also, I had a sweet dog. Oh, never mind. I had a sweet long sleeve shirt that was yellow with blue and red racing stripes. There was a G.I. Joe sized superhero guy who could totally fly and could run down either arm and launch into the air and fight evil. Now, I'm not so sure. Maybe the skeleton dog was a ghost, but I don't think the G.I. Joe was. So, I mean, some of these are, I would say, imaginary. I would not say that that these are necessarily spirits. Okay, here's one that might be a little creepy. This person said, I had loads of imaginary friends when I was a kid, most of which were just personifications of my dolls and favorite characters from books and TV. But I remember one with a completely unique personality from when I was about 9 and living in Virginia. She was called Christine or something similar. And as much as I can remember, she lived in the house before we moved in. I had long pigtails and close to my age. I didn't think much of it until recently when my parents and I were talking about that house that we used to live in. My mom told me that she used to hear footsteps and a child's voice coming from upstairs while I was at school. And my dad told me he once found an old photo of a little girl at the bottom of one of the closets where he was cleaning it. Unfortunately, he couldn't tell me if the girl had pigtails. That sounds like a ghost, a spirit. When my sister and I were young, we both had imaginary friends, another story. But we both sensed hers. It's her name. We played with her outside. My sister talked our mom into setting a place for her at the table a few times. Eventually, our parents were uncomfortable with how convinced we both were of this imaginary friend and forbade all to mention her. Some years later, we learned that there was a small group of Native Americans living in the area that had been wiped out 100 years before. The name of the group was that which my sister's imaginary friend had said was hers a long time ago. That's a little creepy. Well, here's somebody. I had a flock of flying rabbits. They were different colors, but beyond that, I don't recall much about them. My mom assures me that they were quite a big and continuing thing for me for some time, though. Flying rabbits. That's probably imaginary, more than likely. Okay. This is a good one. I remember I was always excited and would rush to get to bed, something that a kid never does. I would ask to go to bed early so I could see them. My bedroom was set out in a sort of U shape. My bed was in the middle of everything, was set around facing me. I didn't have a TV in my room and only had the basics. I remember laying in bed, it being pitch black with only some light coming in from my curtains when two kids would come out. I don't know where from. They seemed to step out of the darkness, would sit on my bed and talk to me about my day, calling me Silly Billy. My dog Sophie would often come rushing into my room and jump on the bed. I would calm her down, kissing and petting her, but upon looking up, the girls were always gone. I think my room was being decorated with new wallpaper, and I stayed in my parents' bed for a few nights. They put me to bed with some warm milk, cookies, and a Disney film on their TV. Wow, that would be nice. I never got pampered like that. It was like, go to bed. The two girls would come out from my room and sit on my parents' bed and watch the film with me. I remember grabbing some cookies and my glass of milk and offering it to them. And one of them, looking really happy, shocked, and the older girl shaking her head said, "We can't." They both had white night dresses on and their hair was in a bun. They never had any shoes on, and they would come and see me almost every night up until I was 7. I honestly can't remember their names. This is over 20 years ago. They always seemed terrified when my dog would run into their rooms and vanish. My mom later found out 15 years before, 2 young girls got attacked by a neighbor's dog in our yard and died. Oh, that's tragic, isn't it? At 4, my parents divorced. My dad, with not many resources, moved into the attic of this comically pink house in the bad side of town. Yeah, let's live in the worst side of town and paint our house something everyone will notice. He hung a tire swing from a tree in the backyard. I had a lot of fun with that. And I remember this guy living in the basement of the house who would hold conversations with me out of the basement window while I played. His name was Tim. He had a yellow jacket and a bright pink helmet every time I saw him, which was every time I went outside. Once in a while, he would ask me to climb the window, but I always said, "I don't think so, Tim," because I thought it was funny that actually angry and mad. I asked my dad recently about Tim, and he said nobody lived in the basement, and it was used for storage. I don't know if Tim was real or not, but I'm glad I didn't go into the basement. When I was about 5, I had a pair of imaginary friends, a brother and a sister, who only I could see. I lived on a bend in a river half a mile down a dirt road in a wooded area. When I got older, I found out the land we used to live on was to be a trading post back in pioneer days. They only showed up when I went outside to play, and I remember they wouldn't play on the swing set with me, just play with sticks and rocks in the dirt next to it while I swung. When I got off the swing set, they would follow me around our yard, but they never traveled outside the yard. And they lived on 160 acres. Well, that's a lot of acres. I think that's an imaginary one, but it's kind of cute. Pigs in space, basically. Oh, here's one. I had an imaginary evil twin named June. Does any of you have imaginary evil twins? Or are you the evil twin? Where would you stand if your imaginary friend started touching you inappropriately and you didn't like it? Ah, you tell them to go away. I had an imaginary evil twin named June who lived in the attic. Whenever I did anything wrong, I blamed her. So my parents would make her write apology letters. I'm right-handed, so I used my left hand to write them, thinking this would fool them. 20 years later, I'm playing poker, and a dude at the table called me June. I honestly did a double take until I realized he'd just forgotten my actual name. I'm sorry, that's a little creepy. Okay. And there's a place called, that was the website called Factinate. I'm going over to unexplainedmysteries.com. Hello, everyone, Star Explorer says. Titles himself an alien embryo. I just wanted to talk about this because it's really bothering me. When I was young, I had an imaginary friend named Josh. I liked him because he could climb up on the walls and could sit on the ceiling. I can't remember how he looked, but I feel as if he's still here, just being more quiet about it. I've seen him a couple of times afterwards, giving me quite a shock. I told my friends, and he tells me to look up Slender Man and Grinning Man, but mine is somewhat different from these. Mine is tall, about 8 feet, very skinny, but you can't see bone structure. He's very smooth looking with grayish white skin. He's naked. Oh, God, my eyes. But had no privates, apparently. He had a big grin, but not from ear to ear, and his back, and it's black. So no teeth, no tongue. He has no nose. Ears are hair and eyes are black, no white and very big. That sounds creepy. I've seen him one early morning watching me from the bottom of the stairs as I went to the bathroom. I seen him crouching behind the table. I saw him peeking from behind the porch, so I could only see the top outline of his head and eyes, and I saw his shadow once in the backyard. Seems to follow me everywhere I go. How can I stop him from coming back? He's already come back. I don't know what you're going to do. I don't know. I do not know. Another person called Disembodied Voice. I had a personal experience with an imaginary friend before, but those are pretty personal and I'm ashamed to talk about it. But my uncle and his girlfriend's daughter, Sarah, not using her real name, had an imaginary friend called Sally. One day they walked into Sarah's room and it was flooded with water. Sarah said that Sally did it. They tried their best to debunk it, where there was no busted or leaking pipes. It never rained that night. The windows to her room were sealed shut. They just couldn't find source of the water that come into the room from. So basically, it just filled the room full of water. That's weird. Very strange. Any of you have an imaginary friend? Are you brave enough to admit it? No? Chicken. I bet one of you, at least one of you, had an imaginary friend. Then you have the person, imaginary friends are more likely imaginary. I guess, I don't know. Some of them seem a little. Now, psychologists say that it can be a sign of creativity or a way of coping with stress or loneliness. So, okay. Grown-ups describe imaginary friends on graveyard shift that may or may not have been imaginary. Let's see what they've got to say. Now, there's the usual typical imaginary friend where they won't let you sit down because their friend is sitting there. Anyway, here's the story. I was an imaginative kid and had several imaginary friends. My first one was different than the rest. When I was 2 or 3, I had an imaginary friend named Karen. 2 or 3 is awfully young to have to be able to give a name to a friend. I mean, that's pretty young. My whole family knew about her, and I would insist she be treated like a real person. Unlike my later fantasy folks, my mom would hear me carry on whole conversations with her alone, and I was always a little curious where I'd come up with the whole thing. It seemed more complex than toddler pretend. I genuinely thought she was a person and that people were inconsiderate to her by not acknowledging her. Sometimes to humor me, my parents would, out of the blue, be like, "Well, hello, Karen." And I'd glare, replying, "She's not here right now." We ended up moving, and once we did, Karen wasn't mentioned anymore. Since I was young, I don't remember too much, just a warm feeling like an old friend. My mom asked me about it when I got older, and I told her I could confidently remember making up my other later imaginary friends, Howard the Duck. I'm sure that'll tickle some people, and his girlfriend Chuck, but not Karen. She told me she always wondered if I was seeing something she wasn't, but no harm ever came, so she didn't worry about it. Well, this person's in their 30s now, and they're reading about a case that changed how soon you could report a missing person. As I had realized that, I guess, near where she lived, there was a girl named Karen, but she went missing. And as I read further, they learned that Karen's murderer had buried her body in the town I had lived in. At that point, not expecting much, but rather curious, I texted my mom for the address of our old house. As it turns out, Karen was murdered and then buried about a mile and a half from our home. Now, they say, I'm not 100% sure this was my Karen, but it was kind of creepy. And they're thinking that's kind of sad if this was a spirit lingered because she died in an untimely way. So, I mean, that's kind of sad. I like this particular story. Let's see. This is on Now. It's like an online magazine. Nowthelove.com, AU. A man has revealed the terrifying moment he and his wife realized their daughter's imaginary friend was actually the ghost of a child who had died in their house. The father, Eric, said he was not perturbed when his 3-year-old daughter, Rebecca, started babbling about a boy called Jonathan. She always talked about her friend Jonathan. We had no idea who he was. She didn't go to school yet. She still had this obsession with her closet and often said Jonathan was hiding there. She would take us to the closet and say that Jonathan is in there. We would open the door and was greeted by her clothes and toys. The story didn't alarm us. We assumed she had a little imaginary friend. What child didn't? We thought it was cute. When Eric's wife became pregnant again, they decided to move to a bigger home, selling their bungalow to a young couple with no kids. 4 months after his family moved out, Eric got a call from the new owners. Excuse me, I don't sleep well. While renovating, they had found a long-forgotten, barely visible trapdoor in the back of Rebecca's old closet. Trapdoor led to a void that contained a box that chilled Eric to the core. I asked him what was in the box. Just some old baby photos and some baby clothes, he expressed. The box just says Jonathan on it. That's creepy. That is creepy. So, MA, we had a friend that had an imaginary friend. Yeah, I had, like I said, I never feel alone. I always feel like there's something on spirit side that's with me all the time. And people say, I tell people I'm talking to myself, but I'm actually talking to them most of the time. I didn't have imaginary friends of that kind. I had animals that I was on a ranch, and we had a garden. We had chickens and sometimes sheep and cattle and horses. And you're surrounded by animals. You don't, you play with the animals. Uh, so what do you think? Do you think some of these are something more than imaginary? This one story you might like. We stayed with my grandparents when I was 3 for a few months when my family was between houses. I had an imaginary friend, a little blonde girl. Years later, though, I wondered about her. I first saw her when she was skipping down my grandmother's hallway. I was trying to nap on my grandmother's bed. She stopped outside the bedroom door, and the little girl stopped skipping and said, "Oh, you can see me." Yeah, yikes. Oh, I'm sure MA would like this one. His name was Splashy. In kindergarten, I told a girl she could most definitely not swing on the swing next to me because Splashy was swinging there, and she could she could goddamn wait her turn. Well, that's language out of a kindergartner. Needless to say, the teacher had a talk with me about that. I used to make splashy soup, which consisted of everything I could get my hands on, thrown in the food processor blender and baked in the oven to crisp puke-like consistency. I miss that guy. I don't know if that's just a joke someone put in or not. That's funny though. When I was a toddler between the age of 1 and 2, my mom said I could sit in my crib and talk to. I would sit in my crib and talk to someone. I vaguely remembered an old lady would tell me mommy would be coming soon to help me. Mom said out of the corner of her eye she would see the old lady from time to time, and the lights would shut off on their own sometimes. I think the house was haunted. I was talking to a ghost. Another story. I'm 20, and when I was a younger child, I did have an imaginary friend. It really scared my parents because his name was the Green Man. He was overly tall, wore a doctor's mask, and had blood all over his scrubs. I went to a psychiatrist during my teen years, and we kind of figured out that because of my grandparents' failing health when I was young, I spent a lot of time in hospitals. My parents think the Green Man was a way for me to feel safe while I spent so much time alone in waiting rooms. Yeah, you're going to pick something covered in blood to make you feel safe in the waiting room. To sum up, I had an imaginary friend who was a creepy doctor with bloody scrubs. I'm normal. I guess a whole nother definition of normal. Why did he call him the Green Man, though? Oh, the scrubs are green. Yeah. Got it. Got it. My sister had an imaginary friend named Thoop. Yeah, like soup with a lisp, which she did not have. Thoop was a total jerk. She would go into my room and break my Lego forts and stuff. One day when my sister was playing alone, I went up to her and told her that while she was playing, I had gone into her room and killed Thoop. She got very upset. And no matter how much my mother tried to calm her down and tell her that Thoop was okay, see, she is playing outside. Why don't you go see if she wants to play with you? My sister insisted that I murdered her friend. I bet that was a brother. I know, I grew up with brothers. That's what they would do. I got grounded for what I remember being a really long time for killing Thoop. I remember arguing to my mom that it was done because I hadn't killed a real person. Oh. Next door, I never understood the imaginary friend thing. I had an ex My ex had a daughter who had won, and she called him Enchantin', like enchanting or without the G, and would freak us the heck out by saying stuff like, he's standing right behind you and stuff. Oh, God. Now, this is interesting. Now, this person is around 11 or 12, which is a long time to have an imaginary friend. Um, and they're saying, I had an imaginary friend up until I was around 11 or 12. I'm 28 now, and I still miss her. As a mostly rational adult, it's hard for me to remember whether or not I actually saw her or if she was made up. But I really feel like I saw her. On an eerie side note, I only had this imaginary friend when my family lived in this antebellum house on the Ohio River in Kentucky. And for those of you who don't know what antebellum means, it means before the war. Her name was Orlean, and she was a gigantic black raven. I can remember having conversations with her, and my mom has said in the past that I used to hold long talks with Orlean in front of her. I was the first child for my parents, so I imagine they were just crossing their fingers their next child wouldn't turn out so odd. As far as the standing right beside you stuff, I don't think I ever did that. I can't remember ever sitting in place at the table. And she doesn't remember any triggers causing her to have a giant raven as a friend. So she doesn't know why she had this thing as a friend. Now, knowing that Scott's afraid of spiders, this is a little sad. I mean, how would you like to be this lonely that this person had a daddy long legs they used to talk to? I recall him crawling on my arms and hanging out on my shoulder. This may have been inspired by the children's novel Charlotte's Web. I don't know if that's a true post or not. That's kind of silly. I met Michael on the beach in Pensacola, Florida. I asked my mother if he could come home with us, and she said he could. He rode next to me the entire way home, and we talked in the back seat of the car. He was my imaginary friend from the time I was 2 until I started kindergarten, so about 3 years. Michael was a kid, but was older than me, maybe 6 to 8, but not older than 10. He had dark hair that was short. I think he had red shorts. I remember that he came to me less frequently as I got older, until he came to me one day to say goodbye. He said he found his family was going home. I dreamed about him years later, playing on the beach in the sun. He turned and smiled and waved to me. I don't know how common it is for people to remember their imaginary friends this vividly, and or to dream about them. It sounds like a visitation dream when we have someone who passed away and we dream about them and they say goodbye to us and tell us they love us. And I've had that with my brother when he passed. And he was perfectly normal, looked perfectly healthy. And anyway, I saw the psychiatrist, a teen, who assured me this experience was all very normal. Still, something seems a little off to me, they said. I mean, picking up an imaginary friend at the beach, that's kind of... Now, here's a very lonely caterpillar. Not necessarily imaginary, but I had this caterpillar in my backyard for a few days, and I would have conversations with it. Every year, a caterpillar would come back, and it would be the same kind, so I thought it was the same one and get super excited. To this day, I can't kill caterpillars and get pissed off if anyone tries to. Hey, Voynich, or Voynick. Yeah, we're talking about imaginary friends. And yeah, I say it's 50-50, like maybe half of them are predominantly imaginary. And then the other half there's something paranormal going on, something very strange. And children seem to be more aware and awakened about other side. I mean, they'll see ghosts a lot. The gal that's the wife of Tony from my Ghost Stories Online, her imaginary friend came to her to say goodbye too. And I find that's very interesting. I mean, picking up somebody on the beach and bringing them home and they're your friend for several years is, I mean, that's kind of weird. I mean, and to have names that are so distinctive and stuff and have some evidence later on that there was somebody there, that's kind of weird. So what kind of friend did your friend have, Mandela affected? Did they ever tell you about their imaginary friend? Well, another story from Renob 151 on Graveyard Shift. I had one when I was like 4. He was Charlie. My parents always asked what he looked like, and I said he was a little man. He went everywhere with me. I was a single child at the time. It was to the point where I would cry if my mom sat on Charlie while we were eating lunch. When we moved away, Charlie didn't come with us. My mom asked where he was, and I told her he was going to be a mannequin at Sears. Years later, we found out that a little person had committed suicide in our house before we moved in. That's just sad. That's just sad. And this is from Johnny Psychotic. When I was between 3 and 6, I had 3 imaginary friends. 2 who were the usual little kid stuff. They were invisible and friendly, and I only heard them in my head. My 3rd friend, she was non-invisible. I could see her. I called her Bra and Underpants Girl because that's all she had on. That sounds like something Scott would have. I could see her in my mind clear as day. She looked almost black and white, like black lacy underwear contrast with pale skin, and what I always thought was dirt around her frazzled blonde hair. I can't even wrap my head around how I had ever been able to come up with a friend like that at 3. While my other 2 friends were nice, she wasn't. She wasn't mean, she was just really sad. Constantly. If I asked her where she lived, she'd say, "Those woods," point to the forest behind my house. I'd tell her she could stay in my house, but she'd just say, "I can't." It wasn't a big deal when I stopped seeing her either. Do you think it was something more? Duh. You think, right. Okay. Here's one that sounds a little creepy. When my sister and I were young, we both had imaginary friends, but we could both sense hers. It was like a black ball of energy. My sister claimed her imaginary friend told her its or her name. My sister talked her mom into setting a place for her at the table, and it made everybody very uncomfortable in the household. This feelings. From Kaleidoscope Eyes 907, I had an imaginary friend when I was 5 or 6. Her name was Becky Reeder, and she was maybe 8 or 9, had curly hair, was slightly pudgy. I had her as a friend for about 3 years. She and I would hang out in the downstairs of my house and color and play with dolls, and sometimes play outside. She would never come upstairs, though, and I never found out why. She would just go away when I went upstairs. One night, she invited me to a party. I was excited because she said I could meet her family. She had a mom and dad, grandparents, an older sister, and an aunt. She told me that the party was by the water. like a 10-minute drive from my house, and that it would be fun. I told her I couldn't leave, and she said we could sneak out. I started out the door when my mom heard and came to investigate. She asked what I was doing, and I told her I was going with Becky to a party to meet her family. My mom told me I couldn't go, and I threw a fit because I really wanted to go. My mom picked me up and went to take me to bed, but I wouldn't stop crying, so she brought me to a room to sleep in her bed. A while later, I calmed down, just laying there watching the ceiling when I heard the noise by my bedroom door. Becky was upstairs, and she was standing there. I waved at her and whispered, "I'm sorry, Becky." And she said, "I hate you," and walked out the room. Never saw her again. I've tried Googling deaths in the area, but nobody knows anything. So she was a little alarmed because this ghost wanted her to go to this party by the water. Yeah. You had an imaginary girlfriend one time. She broke up with me because I was too needy. Oh, that's funny. Let's see. My stomach growling. I wouldn't say I had one specific imaginary friend, but rather just spoke to many different characters about stuff. I remember the 3 ghosts that lived in my bathroom that I'd talk to. Not out loud, though. I think there was a little dog character I'd imagine from time to time, though I don't remember him well. Well, anyway, I think I think I'm about done. Um, but I thought it'd be interesting to see, how many people have had imaginary friends and whatnot. The air quality's been terrible here. It's pretty bad when your imaginary friend breaks up with you, imaginary girlfriend. I want to thank everybody for coming by. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I've tried this new thing that YouTube's going to be using for their streaming, and I'm not gonna. I guess I'm gonna figure out what's going on with that. That it's not letting me do anything. Wouldn't even turn on my camera. So it's like maybe I need to just do a brief video telling people when I'll be on, and then do just a live stream from the dashboard, and not try to do what they recommend, because it just didn't work very well. Did Mindy come back or not? Popping, it's pooping, QP, pooping, 2 O's, 1 P, well, 2 P's, one in the middle one. Anyway. Well, I think I'll say good night, or good afternoon. Have a great day, everyone, just like Zach says, and try to stay out of trouble. I am working on a video. I'm going to start a cryptid series, so I'm working on a video that's taking a lot of research because it's a lot more to it than one would imagine. And I like to go when I research something, I really dig my teeth into it, and search all the different avenues and points of view, so that when I do a video, I can be as accurate as I can be, and perhaps produce something that's a little more unique as to other people in the same subject. Anyway, good night, everybody, and take care. I'd say night night. Except I can't, this stupid mouse. Okay.